Hello, Brain Damage Philosopher here, and it's early in the morning, and I'm still formulating exactly how I want to go through the ethical hypotheticals that Saeed brought up to me that I'm going to be doing in section 03C of my ethical philosophy series. So while I'm still sort of sitting on that pile of shit, I was thinking of doing something a little more fun, a little more easy, and probably a shorter video of more general interest. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Kalam cosmological argument. I think I'm going to be doing a series on my responses to every sort of syllogistic proof of God's existence that I can get my hands on, as sort of a way of having a ready-made resource to send to people if necessary, and to remind myself, in case I run into anything interesting or something like that. Um, the reason I want to do every argument is because one of the most annoying things that some of the religious people I know do is that they say that unless I've responded to all of the arguments, then like the cumulative case made by all of the arguments still, works. And unless I've responded to all of the big, theological arguments, then I can't, uh, you know, claim that I've not seen evidence of God or whatever. Yeah, it's a gift scallop and whatever, but why not take it on face value? And the Kalam is the argument that I sort of remembered the best. So I won't have to go through the hassle of looking up the syllogistic form of it for this video, so I figured I'd start with it. So the Kalam cosmological argument has two premises and a conclusion. Premise 1 says, everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Premise 2 says, the universe began to exist. Therefore, conclusion, the universe had a cause for its existence. Now, there are sort of extensions of this argument that try to provide sort of a description of what this cause might look like, and I'll briefly respond to them later. But the core of the argument is this, and if this core piece of argumentation doesn't work, none of the extended Kalam arguments work either. Some of the long ones just substantiate the premises and the conclusion a little bit more. But I'll respond to those in my responses to these more generalized premises and stuff. So I don't really think it's necessary for me to go look for, WLC's specific version or whatever. So I have a number of problems with the first premise. So let's sort of go through them. First of all, we run across the problem of induction. The whole idea that everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence is something that we derive from our experience of everyday objects. But even though every object in our everyday experience seems to follow this rule, that doesn't mean that all objects necessarily follow this rule. This is not a particularly strong objection to begin with, since the theist can simply respond that although we have no way to say for sure that this will continue to apply, right? Because we can't really solve the problem of induction. We have no reason to think that it will not continue to apply, and all of the evidence on the side of it actually continuing to apply. And therefore we can, with a very high probability, say that this first premise holds true. However, to respond to that response and bring in, I guess, like problem 1.5 with this premise, there are actually things within our experience, although not everyday experience, that break this rule already, such as quantum virtual particles. What this means is that we already have examples of things breaking this rule, which means that we have no reason we have less evidence and less reason to think that it applies universally in every other respect, since we have evidence that it doesn't apply in at least some respects. Furthermore, there are some theories of the origin of the singularity that later became the universe that actually use quantum virtual particles in order to describe or explain the origin of the matter and energy that makes up the universe. Which means that the one known exception to this rule, is applicable to the very thing that the Kalam cosmological argument is trying to apply this rule to. But let's move on. The next problem with this argument is by far the stronger. And this problem is the fact that the first premise actually equivocates on the definition of cause. You see, or actually, let's, yeah. So it equivocates on the definition of cause, because all of the things within our experience that need a cause to begin to exist have both a material and efficient cause, a material and efficient components to what causes them to exist. Whereas we are trying to apply this rule to something that would necessarily only have an efficient cause, since the definition of universe that we're using for this argument is the entirety of material existence. What this means is that we are actually trying to take a rule that applies, in our experience, only to a specific set of objects, and apply it to an object, the universe, that would require a subtly different rule. Basically, the rule that we can derive from our experience is whatever material thing begins to exist requires both a material and efficient cause for its existence. Whereas the rule we would need if we want to apply it to the universe is would say a material thing that begins to exist requires an efficient cause only for its existence, which is a different thing entirely. Basically, what's happening here is that in our experience, the material that every time something comes into existence, it's made out of material that already existed. And that's the rule that we're familiar with. But for the universe, that's not possible. There could be no material that already existed when the universe came into existence, because that material would then be part of the universe. So it's a completely different rule. So we can't even use induction to get from one rule to the other. But it actually gets worse, because this first premise is also equivocating on the definition of efficient cause. You see, even if we grant that we can go from a rule that requires both material and efficient causes to a rule that requires only an efficient cause, which we can't, at least not by induction, or not by, which is what this is relying on. Even if we grant that, the efficient cause in our common experience of things beginning to exist is different from whatever the efficient cause would be that could cause the universe to exist. Because for us, all of the efficient causes in our experience have themselves material and efficient causes, and are themselves made of material and acting by certain physical laws. Whereas whatever would cause the universe might act by physical laws, but it certainly could not have a material and efficient cause and could not be made of material. And so it's not only is the first premise equivocating on the word cause, it's also equivocating on efficient cause. But it gets worse than that, because it also is equivocating on the word begin. You see, in our experience, when we use the word begin, we mean something which there was a certain time at which it did not exist, and then a transition, and then a certain time at which it did exist. So at time t0, object A did not exist, and then at time t1, object A did exist, with a transition in between. However, with our understanding, if we are viewing the universe as the entirety of material reality, including space and time itself, which is sort of what the Big Bang Theory leads us to believe about our observable universe, that space and time began at the same time that material expanded, then there was no time t0 at which the singularity that later expanded into our universe did not exist. There was no transition from non-existence to existence. There was always existence. In essence, the universe was eternal, but not infinite into the past. And so these last couple of problems mean that there is actually reason to think that what could be inductively concluded about objects in our everyday experience couldn't be extrapolated to the universe, even if we have a lot of evidence to back up this rule concerning everyday objects in our own existence. There's sometimes theists also make an argument for the first premise by saying that, well, if every material object within the universe requires a cause for its existence, then, of course, since the universe is simply the totality of all material objects, then the universe must require a cause for its existence as well, because the universe is just made up of things that require a cause. However, this is the composition fallacy. Whatever is true of the parts is not necessarily true of the whole. It is entirely possible that it is impossible for nothing to exist, but once something does exist, new things don't need to pop into existence, right? And furthermore, the fact is that we don't know whether space and time, which is the substrate in which all the material things exist, requires a beginning to its existence. That's kind of what we're discussing here. And since the universe is not just the totality of all material things, since we're talking about the beginning of not just all material things, but the beginning of space and time itself, it's entirely possible that different rules apply to space and time itself than the things that are inside space and time. Additionally, right? It could be possible that if nothing exists, space and time necessarily come into existence because nothing is unstable in some way. But once space and time as a substrate exists, new things can't just pop into existence because there's already something there. There's not nothing, and something is more stable than nothing. That's entirely possible. We don't know. That's speculation. But it's another explanation that doesn't require a cause in that sense for the universe. Okay, so let's move on to the second premise, which I also have a few problems with. To begin with, we don't really know that the universe began to exist. Oh, sure, we know that the universe is not infinite backwards in time, but again, the universe has, as far as we can tell, existed for as long as there were states of affairs. Without time, there is no state of affair. So for every state of affair that has ever existed, the universe has existed. And so in this sense, the universe is eternal. There is no time when it didn't exist. It didn't come into existence. It always existed. It's just that always is not infinite. It's also additionally possible that this observable universe that came from the singularity, and expanded in the Big Bang, is not actually the extent of all there is. You see, when scientists talk about the universe, they mean the observable universe. But when philosophers talk about the universe as the sum totality of all material existence, we don't know that the observable universe is all that exists. There could be something outside the observable universe that gave birth to it, a multiverse or something else. Who knows? And in that sense, Um, uh, if we're trying to make claims about the philosophical sense of the universe, we can't really use what we know about the observable universe. Like, we can't necessarily. We can assume that the observable universe is all that there is, and that's fair. That might be reasonable because that's all we see. We don't see anything else. But it's possible that there could be something more that was truly eternal and is infinite into the past, that gave birth to our universe, and we'd really have no way of knowing. And so that eternal thing could then act as a cause for the universe's existence. And furthermore, right? Even if the universe in its current, even if we take the observable universe to be the philosophical sense of the universe in its current form may not have existed forever, but there could be sort of a collapse and expand cycle, or there could be, as John Carroll sometimes speculates, a time-reversed negative universe that proceeds before the Big Bang, and so the universe could actually be eternal in both directions, but for us, time is still not infinite into the past. Like, there are all kinds of different cosmological theories that make both premises 1 and 2 completely unnecessary. And as long as those explanations are logically possible, then this argument holds very little force, because you could simply choose one of those other cosmological theories instead of the one that the Kalam cosmological argument assumes. So now we get to the final premise, that the universe has a cause for its existence. With premises 1 and 2 destroyed, there's no real need to even talk about the conclusion, because if both premises are false, then the conclusion obviously doesn't follow, right? If premise 1, if there's no reason to think premise 1 is true, and there's no reason to think premise 2 is true, then there's no reason to think the conclusion is true. However, it's still interesting to discuss. For instance, the cause that the Kalam cosmological argument wants us to posit in order to, they want us to posit an eternal, non-material God, right? But one could just as easily, for the cause, posit some kind of, other eternal non-material force. In fact, we could simply posit that the laws of physics itself are what necessitate the existence of the universe. And of course, the laws of physics are properties of existence. They're not material themselves. They could be properties of nothing just as much as something. And we have no reason to think that nothing even existed at all. So it could be, they could simply be properties of, the singularity, right? Like, there's no reason that we can't posit an eternal, substrate of some kind in the same way that theists posit an eternal God, even though there's no need to, really. The other thing is that this cause, the arguments that theists use to turn this cause into a God are just really weak. As far as I'm aware, they say, well, it can't be material, because obviously otherwise it would be included in the universe. So it has to be immaterial. It has to be a mind, because only minds can freely choose to do something, and therefore be uncaused. And it has to be timeless, because time began with the universe. And it has to be extremely powerful, because it has to be able to start the universe. So let's go through these one by one. I agree that it can't be material. That's fine. I have no idea why it has to be a mind. Minds don't have the sort of arbitrary, at least the minds that we know of, don't have the sort of metaphysically arbitrary free will that can just decide to do something in a completely uncaused manner. You can certainly posit a mind that can do that, but then I can just posit a singularity that can pop into existence in a completely, metaphysically uncaused manner. It's the same kind of thing. There's also no reason that it needs to be extremely powerful, because very small things can sometimes cause much larger effects. There's a thing called the butterfly effect for a reason, right? It could be this tiny, first domino that gets everything else started. There's also, I agree that it would have to be timeless if there was such a cause. However, timeless and mind are actually contradictory. A mind, by the definition of mind that we use, is something that thinks, that has a process of thoughts that sort of build on each other, and a memory, and can reason and have thoughts follow on one another, and so on. And that requires a temporal ordering that the mind can take place within to have sequences of thoughts. So something which is timeless could not possibly be a mind in any possible sense that we could mean. So yeah, to sum up, the cosmological argument fails because it gives us no reason to believe that everything that begins to exist, in the sense that the universe began to exist, must have a cause. It also fails because there's no reason to really think that the universe began to exist. And it also fails because there's no way to get from some unspecified cause to a God in any sensible manner. So yeah, and personally, my preferred cosmology is the idea that the universe has always existed for as long as there was a state of affairs in which to exist. And it's simply a necessity of reality that it existed. The singularity was there when time began, and as soon as time began running, it expanded because time began running when it expanded, and it's just there, right? It's sort of eternal but not infinite, right? Which you could probably have told that was my preferred cosmological setup just from the way I was making this argument. But yeah, so that's my problem with the cosmological argument.